In today's lesson, we're going to talk about subtracting integers. Now here's a subtraction question, and there are a few names that you need to be aware of. Mathematicians are always giving special names to everything, and this is no different. So the very first name is called the minuend, and it is simply the word used for the number that you start with. Now this is called the subtrahend, and it's the number that you're actually subtracting. And last but not least is the result that you get after you do the subtracting, and this is called the difference. And the difference is something that you're going to hear and see quite often when we're talking about subtraction. So let's have a quick review. Now, we have talked about adding integers. So how are addition and subtraction related? Because they are. And we're going to start with addition, actually. Addition undoes subtraction. I will say that time and time again, but what does it mean? So let's start off with a subtraction question. 8 minus 5 equals 3. Well, 3 plus 5 equals 8. So if we look at this addition is what undoes the subtraction. So now let's look at subtraction, and subtraction undoes addition. So here's a 6 plus 4 equals 10. That's a simple addition problem. Well, 10 subtract 4 equals 6. So this subtraction is what undoes the addition. And these are what we refer to as opposite operations. So we're going to talk about some fact families, and we're going to rewrite this addition sentence as a subtraction. So 3 plus 7 equals 10. So let's go ahead and rewrite using only those numbers and a subtraction. If I take 10 minus 3, I end up with 7. Or I could also take 10 subtract 7, and I would end up with 3. Notice that all of these are true statements. And we can write any addition sentence and rewrite it as a subtraction. Let's have a look at 4 subtract 3. Now I know you could do this in your head. If you have 4 candies and you eat 3 of them, how many do you have left? Well, let's look at it from the number line perspective, and let's start with the minuend, which in this case is 4. So we're going to put our starting point at 4, and then we're going to subtract 3. So where do we end up? Well, just as you'd expect, if you have 4 candies and you eat 3 of them, you're only going to have 1 left. All right, well, what if we eat all of our candies and we decide we're going to have 4 subtract 4? Where are we going to end up? Well, we're going to start at the minuend again, and this time we're going to subtract 4, and we end up at 0. Well, what happens if we are trying to subtract a number that is bigger than what we have? Well, here we have the little number line again, and we're going to start, as we said, at the minuend. Well, we want to subtract 7, so we're going to move 7 spaces. Oh, look at what happened there. We have negatives, and I know you've seen these negatives on the number line, but that's how integers work. When we're subtracting integers and we subtract this bigger number than what we start with, we're going to end up in the negative side of things. So 4 subtract 7 gives us negative 3. What if I have 4 plus negative 7? What will I get? Well, again, let's look at the number line. I still am going to start with the minuend, which is at 4. Well, then I have to add a negative 7. Well, negative is still going this way, so I'm going to add some negative. So I'm going to move 7 places in the negative direction, and look at where I end up. I end up at negative 3, which is exactly the same spot. So we can say that 4 minus 7 equals negative 3. It's the same thing as 4 plus negative 7, and it also equals negative 3. Well, what if we have a negative number and we're going to subtract? Well, let's look at our number line again. So we start with the minuend, which is negative 3, and we are going to subtract 5. So that tells me I go in this direction. So if I subtract 5, that means 5 spaces to the left, and I end up with negative 8. So we say that negative 3 minus 5 is equal to negative 8. Well, what happens when you subtract a negative number? Now, this one always is a little bit tricky to think about, but let's simplify that right now. Let's just say that you owe your friend $8. So you are in debt $8. We represent this with a negative 8. So here we have our number line, and I'm going to put a little dot, red, because red is bad, debt is bad, at negative 8. And your mom says, but I don't want you to have a debt. I want to take your debt away so that you won't have it. Well, that take away can be thought of as your mom wants to subtract your debt. She wants you at least to get back to 0. So how is she going to do that? Well, to go from negative 8 to 0, there's only one way to do that. She's going to have to give you $8 so you can pay your debt. So if we add 8, that brings you back to 0. And so from that, we can see that subtracting a negative 8 is equal to a positive. So here we have negative 9 minus a negative 16. So remember what we just looked at. Taking away or subtracting a negative is like taking away someone's debt. So we are in fact giving them money. So that's like saying that taking away negative 16 is the same thing as giving them 16. So we're adding. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to change that subtracting a negative into a positive, and let's see where we end up. So negative 9 plus 16, what do we get? Well, first thing we're going to do is start with the minuend at negative 9, and then we are going to move 16 places. This time we're going to go 16 to the right because we're adding 16. So when we add 16, we count 16 spaces, and we end up at 7, a positive 7. And that's your lesson on subtracting integers.